6 o'clock, and I see that there are over 70 people who have been able to log in. So I'm going to declare that we have a quorum and that it is time to get started. For those of y'all I haven't met, my name is Jessica Nelson, and I am the organist and choir master at St. Andrew's Cathedral in Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm also a member of the Association of Anglican Musicians. Before I introduce my friends on this panel, I want to talk just real quick about what we can expect from this webinar tonight. Um, we recognize and are sensitive to the fact that we've got folks working in just a number of different contexts right now. Some of us are in places where you're able to gather folks together to sing in some sort of limited fashion. And some of us are in places where we can't do that at all. And some of us are working in virtual spaces. Um, but I imagine that most of us, and this includes myself, are doing some sort of combination of limited in person plus virtual music making. And I also want to acknowledge that some of us are in very well resourced parishes with access to lots of technology that we're very comfortable with. Some of us are in less well resourced parishes with technology that is maybe limited to an old laptop and an iPhone. And again, I imagine that some of us, and myself included, are somewhere in between. Um, so as we go along, we'll try to, be mindful of that. I am very hopeful and confident that all of us will come away tonight with at least a couple of practical ideas, things that we can implement uh, immediately, and things that we can use in the longer term. Um, I think we've gotten this far in the pandemic with good faith and good intentions, and many of us are now at the point where we need to make longer term plans. So that's kind of what we've got in mind. And that's also, what gave us the title of this webinar. We walk by faith. Now, what do we do? Um, so I am hopeful tonight that we'll come away with greater confidence about some of the technology that we'll be using. Um, I hope that we will come away with a renewed sense of hopefulness and joy about making music during what we kind of laughingly call COVID tide, which I think is sticking. I want to introduce you to our panelists, and I'm not sure what order they appear in on your screen, but here's how they appear on my screen. I've got Marissa Hall, who is at St. Peter's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she also wears a few other hats, but that's where she is organist and choir master, correct? Below Marissa is Woosung Kang, who is at St. George's in Nashville. To his left is Arreon Harley-Emerson, who is with the Delaware Boys Choir of Delaware. I may get that wrong, and I apologize. And Holy Apostles Church in Wynnewood, Pennsylvania. Above him is Colin Lynch, who is at Trinity Church in the city of Boston. And the person above Colin is Jason Abel, and he's kind of our technology helper for tonight. Jason works at Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia, historic Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia. And he's also going to be monitoring the Q&A. So if you have questions as we go along, don't hesitate to pop them in there. And again, I'm Jessica Nelson, and my job tonight is to kind of moderate this conversation and steer it just a little bit. And I want all of you to know how grateful I am to the Association of Anglican Musicians, Marty Burnett, and the rest of the board for asking me to do this. So here's a question that I have for each one of you, and we'll start with Marissa. At what point did you realize things were changing for the long term? I know that for several weeks I was in denial about it. And I said, oh, I'm not doing any of that. We're not going to live stream. We're not going to do a virtual choir. It's going to be fine in just a couple of weeks. Little did I know. So at what point did you realize that things had changed?
Well, that's a great question. Kind of in my particular circumstance is a little bit complicated because while I'm here representing with my St. Peter's hat on as director of music and organist, I actually didn't get that position until June. And so I was working at the church. I was organist and assistant choir director there. And so for a while, I was just kind of taking cues from my colleague at the time, Paul Keene, and the rector there. And they were really trying to figure out what is the future of this very small parish going to look like if this is indeed a long-term situation, which it has revealed itself to be. And so for a while, many of you know that I also work with Colin Lynch at Trinity Church Boston. And so I was kind of focusing back and forth on which church was going to make which moves at which time. And so I guess the realization that I needed to actually make some real changes was shortly after I assumed the role of director of music in June and decided that we are going to have at least one virtual choir thing per week, because at that point the church had decided that it was going to be doing live Zoom services every Sunday. And of course, as we all have figured out probably the hard way, that Zoom doesn't lend itself to live singing. And so we needed to have an option that gave us some semblance of normality in the context of a Zoom service. And so for me, it wasn't until probably middle of the summer that we started really working towards what we have now. But it definitely took a long time to accept that was what was happening.
Woosung, can you answer that same question?
Yeah, so we were in a kind of interesting situation as well, because at St. George's, when the whole pandemic happened, we're kind of preparing to switch gears in our minds, because the time of the nave renovation, which is a kind of a major thing, and lockdown for the COVID actually like almost coincided. And that actually kind of helped us to focus on the positive things, because there's so many things we couldn't really control. Like our interim organ that we actually kind of had it made for during the time of when we're getting a new organ. We didn't know if it'll get delivered on time. So we just had no control over that, but it did. We're actually very fortunate to have an AV team in place, which allowed us to transition really smoothly. So we had several meetings to see how we actually, change the camera angles, the sound, and we kind of almost have to like produce the service in terms of from a very different perspective. But we went into the kind of whatever it takes mode really quickly. I did struggle with the virtual choir for about a week or so, because so many people were kind of trying, and right away it was something that was kind of an unknown territory, and you saw kind of mixed results right away. So I was very unsure of it, but quickly it was very clear that was the safest thing to do when we really didn't know what was going on. So we kind of just went for it. But we did it more gradually because we had streaming capabilities. We actually just did the audio in some of the services with the choir, and try to involve the choristers a little bit as well. But I think for me it was much easier when it was much easier to accept the changes when I actually knew the choir was right behind it. We are very frank and honest right away, communicating really directly what the challenges were and what our plans were. Really helped them to get on board, and then getting their support really made it making decisions really easy. So we kind of got the ball rolling really quickly with all the kind of what was going around.
I think a little transparency goes a really long way, especially during such uncertain times. If you can say, look, I don't know what's going to happen next week, but here's what we're going to do this week.
That was literally it. Yeah, we actually have to kind of like, we have no idea what's happening next week, but let's try this kind of an approach. Yeah.
Arreon, can I ask you the same question?
Yeah, so I think the last week of February that it was going to go downhill. I happened to have a meeting with the Secretary of State in Delaware, and he at that point was no longer shaking hands and said, I hope you guys are preparing for, what life is going to be looking like. And we were off at that point with the choir school of Delaware was off to the American Choral Directors Association conference. And he was like, I don't think it's going to be the same when you come back. And sure enough, he was correct. And he said, not 2 weeks, maybe prepare for a couple of months. And at that point, I was like, couldn't be. It just couldn't be. But by the time, we had left for our trip, there were many COVID cases that were popping up, and I was starting to see some things on some forums about schools closing and things like that. So while we were on this trip, we pretty much came up with a plan with how we were going to deal with choir school, because we had a lot of bus time. But pretty much we've been doing everything, all of our scheduled engagements. We've had rehearsals 6 days a week since March 16th. Consistently through. So it's been definitely a challenge. But what I would say to folks is, it's degrees of scale depending on the situation that you are in. But I believe firmly that everybody can do something. And so I'm excited to talk about what those things that we can do are.
Exactly. Colin?
Sure. So at Trinity, I don't think we were thinking too far ahead when COVID was bubbling up. Like maybe Arreon had maybe a little bit more of a sense that something was about to happen. From my memory, it was about Wednesday or Thursday before we realized that we weren't having church on Sunday. So we were left to scramble. And at Trinity, we really don't have any filming equipment. And our AV system is pretty antiquated. And so we assembled with our 8 staff singers, 1 priest, and 1 organist, myself, and somebody from our communications office who quickly bought a thing called a slingshot. I think that's what it's called. And everybody just connected their iPhones to it and filmed themselves, and he was able to switch between cameras. And it was a complete and utter disaster. And the singers were very stressed out about it. It was hard to sing that way. We had trouble with the streaming, and so we decided, okay, we're not doing that again. So the next Sunday, we attempted to do a live Zoom where Richard Webster and I were playing the organs from our various homes, our practice organs, and people were reading from their homes, and we hit that sweet spot on Facebook where everybody was trying to stream their services at the same time, and our service fell apart. And so our rector decided that our guiding principle needed to be reliability at that point, because our congregation was getting really frustrated with us, and we needed something reliable and consistent. So that's when we started pre-assembling the services. That's when I first found out about the a cappella app, and we tried it out and used that through most of Lent. And it was during that period that I was getting all the emails from friends and colleagues saying, hey, or actually from choir members saying, hey, look at this virtual choir video. Why can't we do that? And I'm thinking, we're just trying to limp through to Holy Week. But we decided that for Easter Sunday would be our first big virtual choir video. We just put all our eggs in that basket. And the question was when did we realize that things were going to be long term? And I'm not quite sure I know the answer to that, because in the beginning it seemed like, oh well, we just need to get through this Sunday and that Sunday, and then it was we just need to get through Easter, and now here we are with no end in sight.
Right. Colin, I want to tag one thing you said. You talked about the slingshot or whatever it was that you used not working as expected. I've learned, again, the hard way, that you have to practice with whatever technology you're using. I think I am a person of moderate to average intelligence, but sometimes these things will not work the way you expect them to, or not work the same way twice.
And we had practiced and did a whole dress rehearsal, and the iPad controlling the whole thing crashed at 9:58. And so these things happen.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask a very nuts and bolts kind of question. One of the things that I did early on, once we realized that we couldn't safely meet together in person, I thought, well, what non-musical options can we explore that would be useful for both folks in the choir and folks in our congregation? And one of those things I did was a collect workshop, just gathering with a group of folks, teaching them about the collect form, having them try their own, and then coming back several days later to discuss those. Have y'all had any success with any kind of non-musical, or and by non-musical I mean non-music making, so musicianship or theory or anything like that that you want to share? And feel free to unmute yourselves and just start talking.
Sure, I'll jump in. So we did a lot of kind of asynchronous sort of non-musical things, and then would kind of meet on Zoom to do it, whether it was musicianship, oral skills, other sorts of like understanding the liturgy, all those sorts of things we absolutely did. And I think they were good for many of our folks because they allowed them to get used to Zoom. It allowed them to get used to meeting online. It allowed them to get into a repetition. And so I think that is the best place to begin with something that is completely amusical. Even if you're going to just meet with your choir and say, I just want to do a check-in, a wellness check with everybody, I definitely think it's totally worth doing it, and doing it at your established time. So from the first week, we decided that we were going to follow 3 principles: community, consistency, and connection. And so that has been kind of our guiding principles throughout this entire thing. Is first we're going to make community, then we're going to be consistent. So every time that there was something that would have been scheduled during, in the real world, not in the virtual world, but the actual physical world, we were going to do something. And that we were going to make sure that everybody was connected. So if that meant that we were kind of running around figuring out how to get people connected, if that meant that we were doing trainings with folks, if that meant that we were downloading TeamViewer, which is a really great program where you can basically remote into someone else's computer, we did a lot of that so that we could ensure that everyone had a base level of comfort. But it was really the non-musical experiences that allowed us to be able to do that. I think had we started off in that rehearsal doing full choir full tilt that first time, I'm not sure that we would have been as successful, and we would not have been able to make some serious deposits into what I like to call the trust bank. And so I feel like whenever you do anything, you got to make a deposit into the trust bank. And so that really did it for us, was doing kind of non-virtual choir, non-rehearsal things that were not intimidating, but we're still using some of the basic tools that we continue to use today.
Yeah, so many of these platforms are just completely foreign to so many people. And those of us who are more or less digital natives or right on the cusp of being a digital native have adapted fairly easily. But I've seen a lot of friends who are organizing some sort of technology help desk, either for the folks in their choir or for the folks beyond their choir in their parish, that has been tremendously successful. And I think it's so important to make that technology as accessible as possible, especially for folks who may not be able to otherwise get out of the house very much, or do whatever, just in that effort to keep them engaged and to fight off loneliness.
Yeah, at Trinity, we started Acapella Angels to try to help folks use the Acapella app. If any of you have used it, it's incredibly confusing and frustrating, even for somebody who knows how to use technology. And that's evolved as we've changed the way we do things. But to your point, Jessica, one of the great points about using our Acapella Angels is it's not just about helping with technology. It's also an opportunity to check in with somebody who might be at home and alone, and an opportunity to engage with them.
Marissa, I'm about to put you on the spot. Just thinking about non-music making things, have you done any teaching around hymn writing or experimenting with that? Marissa writes hymn texts. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot in an uncomfortable way, and if so, I apologize. And at least the ones that I've seen are fantastic.
Thank you. So actually, you just gave me a really great idea, because I have not done that. I have written a couple in COVID tide, because what else do you do with your free time when you're not editing videos or practicing, I guess. but I think the main non-musical thing that I have done that was successful in the summertime, and I hope to revamp it again, was just a sort of a forum that we would do. So at St. Peter's on Wednesdays, we had done sort of like an evening forum thing, and sometimes it would be a scriptural study, or sometimes it would be guest speakers. And for a period of, I think, 4 or 5 weeks, I did a sort of a church music series, like 101, and I just kind of picked topics, and obviously had to do a very broad surface level overview, because I was basically summing up all of my sacred music education into 5 weeks of 30 minutes. But it was, I kind of talked about like Psalms and Canticles, and the history of that, and I did the history of hymnody from like its basics into now, kind of covering a period each week. And I was surprised by how many parishioners, non-music people, non-choir people, really appreciated that, just because particularly my congregation happens to be a very sort of scholarly group of people that really like facts and trivia, and so they ate it up and they really loved it. And we were able to connect it to some pretty well-known hymns with the parish. And so it had that musical tie, but it was definitely using Zoom in a way that was successful, and not trying to sing. That was probably the best case that I have done with non-music making. But lately, as the program year has started, I've started a sort of open choir rehearsal that, as Arreon said, is at the same time as it would be normally if we were in precedented times. And it basically is now open to the whole parish in a way that is sort of non-committal, but just saying like, look, we're going to sing some hymns. You're on mute, so nobody's going to judge you. And we are going to talk about what music theory means, what intervals are, what is that weird squiggly thing in your hymnal that you've always wondered, but And so it's actually been really great, and I've enjoyed seeing new faces and just getting to kind of do music with the pressure off. There's no longer a Sunday deadline in the same way there was, and so we're working on musicianship in a new way.
Yeah, I want to jump in and just kind of say, focus on the whole consistency thing, because at St. George's, as soon as the whole pandemic happened, we kept the usual Wednesday choir rehearsal times for the kids and the adults. I had no idea what we were going to do, but I just decided we should at least do a Zoom, just check in, just talk to each other, see how everybody's doing, and then we'll just figure out what we'll do in terms of curriculum. And, St. George's is pretty large church, and we have a lot of like Bible studies and other things that actually happens. And our rector actually asked me to be part of the rotation for the webinar in June. So in the summer, it was like a weekly, study for the whole congregation. And I kind of found it as a good opportunity for me to like say hello to some of the parish members that, like a typical large parish problem that I just don't get to, talk to everybody and don't know everyone. And so, I was asked to talk about some musical topics, but I kept the topics really general. And it was kind of personal, almost like kind of something that people can relate to. And we had a very exciting projects of the church renovation and the new organ and the acoustic enhancement. So, those are the topics that people really wanted to hear, because, you can use a lot of visual aids, and I think people are very thirsty to, hear some good news. So we try to, keep things very, quite happy and joyful. And for the choir and the choristers, when our season starts in September, we're starting the season, going back to the whole consistency thing. And during our rehearsal times, we actually meet on Zoom for an hour for like a class, and we talk about topics of a choral evensong, specific composers, analysis of certain liturgy, and historical backgrounds of certain services, etc. Kind of things that you want to get into more details during your rehearsals, but you can't really do that because you're crunched with time. So we're using that time to do more of a non-singing activities during that time.
Wonderful. One thing I want to share is that our Cathedral's UIC director has planned several cathedral-wide game nights, family game nights that I've gotten to participate in, and I've gotten to meet a ton of folks that I would never otherwise encounter, and everybody has discovered just exactly how competitive I am. about anything trivia related. So, um,
Jessica,
yeah,
someone has asked a good question about Zoom fatigue.
uh, yeah,
Dealing with kids and adults who are doing everything online, um, how do you not just add to the burden?
that's a really good question, and that came from Mark Howe, who is at the Cathedral in Burlington, Vermont, if I'm not mistaken. I've certainly encountered that with our folks, and I'll share that I've encouraged at least the folks in my choir that if they don't feel like they can do an hour of zooming at the end of a long day of zooming, that's okay to take the break. You know, maybe they're still participating by sending in recordings for the virtual choir. So I'm trying to. I'm not as fussy about things like attendance as I normally would be.
Yeah, at Trinity, we normally like to keep a pretty strict attendance policy, but we've really relaxed that these days. And some people do the virtual choir videos, some people do the Zoom. Hopefully, they do both. But also trying to check in with people who you haven't seen in a while, and often you hear from them, "Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm an ER doctor and I'm overwhelmed," or my kid has some learning challenges and just can't handle that much time on Zoom. So just being a little bit more flexible than we normally would be.
As far as kids go, I deal with that a lot every single day. So what do you do after the kid's been online for 8 hours for school? The very first thing is I personally run it like I run a real rehearsal, which means that those kids aren't sitting down. So I'm not sitting down, I'm standing up. We're engaged, we're kinesthetically moving. I'm making sure that there is fun, that there is game, that there's some game in every component. If you're not doing it, why are they going to want to come? And that's not just something you should be doing in Zoom time. That's something you should be doing every day because it's just good pedagogy and it's just good for the soul to include that fun and humor and making sure you're laughing. And that choir is not like this stand straight and like, don't move kind of a thing. And so my kids know that. And they respond when it's like, okay, we're going to move, and they all know cameras on. I tell them, I don't teach the blank screens. You got to turn on the cameras. I want to see you moving. We're going to do some echoing patterns back and forth, calling on people. I don't call on anyone, they call on each other. So if I were to call on Colin, Colin would then call on the next person. And so that's how I keep like all of the kids engaged all the time. Even when there's the intergenerational rehearsal, same thing. We're up and moving. People are calling on one another, and everyone knows that there's a check-in and a checkout process. So I'm going to hear everybody's voice at least once, twice in that rehearsal. And then as far as that kind of Zoom fatigue and all of that goes, I do try to switch it up. Sometimes and I do everything within the confines of the rehearsal. So if that's a recording assignment, if that's I bring a lot of people in because people are so accessible. I've been bringing in a lot of folks. We've been focusing on Black and Brown composers and bringing them in to talk with folks. So that's been something that folks have really been interested in. So I would say that there are a lot of ways that you can make it something that's not just sitting kind of passively on the screen. So that's what I'm always thinking about. I'm thinking, wow, I got to put on my actor's mentality and put on a show for the next hour and a half. And that's what I do in front of rehearsal too. So I would think about doing all of those same sorts of things that I know each of you guys do anyway, but just doing them virtually, I think makes a big difference for people wanting to go. I have higher numbers in COVID time than I did previously, because I think people don't have to go anywhere and we have a little bit more reach, I think, than we normally would. So I think it is possible to be engaging.
I could not. Woosung, were you about to say something?
No, go ahead.
I couldn't have planned that segue better. So thank you so much, Ariana. I appreciate it. What are y'all doing that seems to be particularly successful with children? Marissa, I'll let you start if you like and talk about choir camp.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, one of the things that I enjoyed the most about this summer, different as it was, was that I have relocated to Florida for a while to spend time with family. And so there's a parish down here that I previously worked at and I'm very close to. And every year I usually come down and do what we call the summer choir camp. And so it's a week long where we just do a morning, like 9 to 12 or something like that. It's very community outward focused. We're trying to bring in kids to the church. Hopefully our choristers that are already in the church will come, but it's always been a sort of like outreach kind of opportunity. And so I was so excited to do it this year. And of course, when the pandemic hit, there was this moment where we thought, are we just going to cancel? Are we not? And my colleague Betsy Calhoun at St. John's just said, well, we're just going to do it on Zoom. And immediately I thought, oh my God, no, we're not. This is going to be terrible. But we did it, and it was so much fun because we had to just completely transform the camp. It could not be what it ever was. And so what we did was, in addition to like one virtual choir thing, which was challenging for kids especially kids who had never taken a music class in their life, to then submit Lead Me Lord by Samuel Sebastian Wesley. But the one thing that I think was really successful is that we taught them a lot about composing. And so Jessica mentions this because she was one of our guest composers, as was Richard Webster at Trinity and a number of other sort of like guest popping in people, which was the great thing about Zoom. We didn't have to pay for their travel expenses. But it really engaged the kids in a new way, taught them about how they can create music on paper. And what we did was at the end of the week, all of these kids took pictures of their compositions, sent them to us, and then we had two really fabulous musicians sort of embellish them a little bit and perform them at an end of the week thing. And so this choir camp that was previously all about singing and getting people engaged in the flesh became a sort of more holistic music camp, but we got a lot of great feedback and it was really rewarding.
Colin, you were about to say something.
Well, I have the distinct privilege of getting to work with Marissa and got to see Marissa pull off this amazing choir camp. And then we got to steal all of her ideas for our camp at Trinity, which was similar, but we normally would go away for a week with our choristers, and that obviously wasn't an option, but they already had the week in their schedules blocked off. And so we did a couple hours in the morning, and then we did a couple hours in the late afternoon and evening with Evensong. And during that time, I think we learned a lot that we've now applied to our rehearsals nowadays. And Marissa, please chime in if I don't think of something. But to Arreon's point, we want to have the kids as engaged as possible instead of just sitting on a screen and watching you and listening to you plunk out notes. That's not engaging in real life, and it's certainly not engaging on a computer screen. So what we've found works well is to break the kids into smaller groups if possible. We have some wonderful staff singers who are able to take some of the kids. Marissa, Richard, and I take them in smaller groups, and that way you're able to call on kids more frequently and have them demonstrate. I've been doing a lot of things like playing ping pong with them. So in real precedented times, we would sometimes say take a hymn and have the boys sing the first note and the girls sing the second note and back and forth, and you can do that with two kids on Zoom, and and then you can even do it with more kids and have them sort of rotate around. We've done things like raise your hand when I play a wrong note, or give me a thumbs up if it's a major chord, or a thumbs down if it's a minor chord. So there are a lot of ways to engage kids sort of physically like that, even if they're not singing. And then as far as music theory things, there are a ton of websites and things where you can drill kids and have them respond in the chat, or go around the room, your little Zoom room. So we've had a lot of success, I think, working in smaller groups.
Colin, you said that you stole your idea from Marissa. I think that one of the silver linings I see from all this is that there's been unprecedented creativity and unprecedented collaboration. And collaboration is just a fancy word for stealing. So Okay.
Can I say one quick thing just to add to Colin's list? One other thing that we've recently started that has been really helpful and successful is that we have kept we usually have had a Tuesday rehearsal time from 5:15 to 6:15. And we've kept that time on Zoom to prepare for our Wednesday evensongs. But right before that, from 4:30 to 5:10 on a Tuesday, we have instituted an RSCM check target session. And so what happens is the kids just, if they want to come, they can come early, and I open the Zoom room. And then as soon as they get there, we take a few minutes and then I sort them into breakout rooms by their ribbon level. And so what we have done is there's at least 4 of us, usually 5 adults on the Zoom, that split into rooms. And so there's a red room and a yellow room and a blue room, or dark blue and light blue. And so sometimes it's just one kid, and so they get all the individual attention and they race through. But sometimes it's more of a group teaching session, and the kids have really enjoyed it. In fact, the reason why we did it is because one of our choristers suggested that we should have an RSCM study hall kind of thing. So I love that that suggestion came from one of the choristers, but that has been really helpful.
And we probably want to move on, but if I can just add one more thing, and that's to say that, I think choristers in particularly, and the same probably applies for adults, but they often join choir not just for the music, it's also for the social interaction and the community engagement. So we've been trying to spend some time after our evensong playing a game with them, or, doing something fun that's not music related.
And to that,
sorry,
go ahead.
One quick question that Walden Moore has asked, that's good, is about the Safe Church rules regarding smaller breakout rooms in Zoom.
I saw that. That's a really, really good question, and I don't know the answer to it. I do have our diocesan youth missioner on speed dial, and I will text her and see if I can get an answer to that question in just the next few minutes, unless somebody else already knows the answer to it.
Do you want to go, Marissa? Well, go ahead, Marissa.
Well, I think what we have done is early on we decided that we would break out the rooms so that there would be at least two adults in a breakout room. But when that became more difficult, we sent an email out to all of the parents saying, if your child is going to be on a Zoom, you or another responsible adult needs to be in that room with them. Or nearby within sort of earshot. And so we have just made that a thing. And pretty much you can tell with the kids, like for the younger kids, of course, their parents are on the Zoom helping them log on. But for the older ones, they just know that that's a rule. And we have sort of relied on that. If that's not possible, then we make other arrangements. But so far it's worked out.
Good deal. Yeah, that's such a good question. We don't want kids using technology unsupervised. And I've also heard that that's another issue with the acapella app. Not only is it sometimes frustrating to use, I think there's been some security issues as well. So, I would like to shift gears just a little bit. So far we've been talking about using Zoom and other online platforms as sort of their own thing. We're not trying to approximate, or maybe we are trying to approximate something else. But Zoom and any sort of online platform is its own architecture. We have different kinds of architecture in the church, and each one informs what kind of music we make in that space and how we make music in that space. So I've started to wrap my mind around thinking of the digital environment as having its own architecture with its own performance practice considerations and all the other stuff that goes along with that. And so many of us have either tiptoed or waded or swan dove into making virtual choir recordings. And Colin has agreed to do a little bit of a demonstration. So we've set aside some time for that. And he is going to screen share and talk us through how to do that.
Thanks, Jessica. So a few disclaimers before I do this. And first of all, I want to say that I'm perfectly comfortable playing the organ and making music in front of a large group of people, but making a virtual choir video live in front of people is slightly terrifying. And I'm also hoping that the technology works. So then also, I should say that I work with Apple products, so a Mac. And I know a lot of people are PC people. I'm going to try not to get into the weeds about the specific Apple technology, but just talk about sort of general practices that work in pretty much any audio or video software. And I'm going to try to keep this very sort of broad and basic. Also, let me just say that it's been a blessing to be able to make these videos, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to do anything with our choir members, since we're not able to be in the church. But it's drudgery. It takes a lot of work, and it's not fun. But the reward comes from knowing how much people appreciate it. I also want to say that when I first did this, it took me forever to do the first video. I had an inkling of how the software worked, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And now we do every hymn, every anthem, everything virtual choir style. So I've gotten to the point where I can do it quickly. So if you're gonna do this, if you're gonna wade in, don't be intimidated. Just give yourself a lot of time to experiment and figure it out, and start off small and simple. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. And I know this looks completely scary and intimidating if you've never done this before, but just a quick overview of the process. So Richard or Marissa or I at Trinity will record, let's say, a hymn accompaniment. And before we start, we clap. So we count off 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And we record ourselves often with just an iPhone, a tablet. You don't need anything fancy. It can be totally simple and basic. Then we upload that video to Dropbox. You can use Google. We've used Vimeo for a while. We found that Dropbox worked best for us. And then you can create a link, email it out to your choir members. Then they will record themselves on one device while watching you on another device. We've also had some people figure out how to do both on the same device, but I won't get into that. So then they submit you their videos, and then I edit the audio and the video separately. I think it might take a little bit more time, but ultimately it makes it a little bit easier, and probably makes for a better product. So what you see here is Logic Pro, which is Apple's audio editing software. Many of you have probably heard of GarageBand. So Logic Pro is just the sort of step up luxury model of GarageBand. And
Colin, if I may,
yep.
we'll send you a list of resources in the next day or so, and it's got descriptions of some of these programs. Logic Pro is not inexpensive, but there's a free trial. So, and I think it's 3 months long, and you can play around with it, see if it'll work for you. GarageBand comes native on most Apple products. And there are some free options as well. A popular one is called Audacity, and you can use that on Macs or on PCs. So.
Yeah, thank you. And so I didn't have Logic Pro when coronavirus started. I didn't know how to use it. And so I did the free trial. Let me see if I can figure this out. And I'm glad I did. And there's also a free trial for Final Cut Pro, which is the video editing software. So what you see here, I've added all of the audio from all the files that people submitted. And so I can just go into Dropbox and just drag and drop those videos, and you can also just import it. So then it'll make a whole bunch of tracks here. So each track is a singer. Can you see my mouse moving here? Okay. So I originally changed the names, or did initials, to try to protect choir members. who would probably be mortified to know that I used their video for this. And then I ran out of time, and so they're their videos. So don't tell them. And I know that the husband of one of these singers is on this chat. So Craig, don't tell Darren.
We won't tell anybody. And I'll also offer that I don't think anybody likes the sound of their own voice unaccompanied singing straight into a microphone. I've had to do a lot of cheerleading with my singers and say, look, normally, you sound great. And it's like looking at your pores with a magnifying mirror. Nobody likes what they see.
Even our professional singers were mortified. And so it took us a long time to get over that hurdle too. I think for our choir members, once they saw the finished product of the first one, they thought, oh, well, that sounds great. Why wouldn't I participate in that? And I told them that I really don't go through and listen to each track individually because I really don't have time. I might hear a note or two, but so what you see here, I have all these tracks. I like to arrange them top to bottom. So the sopranos are on the top, altos, tenors, basses. It just helps me keep track. And then I put the accompaniment at the bottom. So this is, and also apologies to Richard, who I stole his organ accompaniment, but it's fabulous as always. So that's who you'll hear playing. Now you'll see all these little sort of spikes, so that you see the line and the spike. So that's when they clapped. And so I'm just gonna sort of drag them over and line them up so that we get all the claps at the same time. Now, one important thing is if you see up here, there are these two sort of things. One stretches it out lengthwise and one stretches it out height-wise. Don't worry about the height thing so much right now. But you'll see, I thought I had them all lined up, but if I stretch it all the way out, you'll see they're not really all that lined up. So I kind of get them to where they look, kind of like, oh, I don't know, something from biology class, and then line them up. And then I do one last check and, make sure that they're really kind of all together. So then this is going to be kind of like when you watch Julia Child and she just throws a bunch of stuff in a bowl and then puts it in the oven and then opens the other oven door and there's the lobster thermidor. So apologies for that. And Jessica, do you want to say something about the Q&A afterwards while I'm doing this?
If we have really specific questions, or if you want to see Colin do something in more detail, he has graciously agreed to stay for a few minutes after the end of the scheduled webinar, just to answer any more questions or show you something in greater detail.
So just for the fun of it, here's what it sounded like before I lined everything up. Beautiful, right? So then I lined everything up, and here's the finished product so far. Christ, whose glory fills the skies, Christ, our real light. So you get the idea. It sounds pretty good, but not quite balanced. And this is where I know Jessica wants to ask about what are some silver linings of COVID-tide, and this is one of them. Because we all dream in real life that we could go to that tenor and just say, shh. So that's what we're going to do here. So if you look here, there's this sort of little button. It looks like a little escalator. So if I click on that, it now gives me these yellow lines here, which are the volumes. So it's the volume. So I can just kind of drag them all. I often like to take all the sopranos. So just for the sake to make this sort of maybe like what is an average of what we're all dealing with, I took out all of our professional singers, and we only have 15 singers here. I threw in a couple choristers for the fun of it. So here we have 3 sopranos, and I'm going to solo them out. I only want to hear the sopranos. Son of righteousness, arise, triumph. And I think I'm hearing a lot of the top person, so I'll drop her down. So you get the idea. So you balance it out that way. And then I go through and do it with each voice part until I'm really satisfied. then let's see, try to get some examples of issues. Now, we've thankfully finally been able to record the organ at Trinity. Until recently, I was using my Rogers organ at home, and Richard was using his practice organ at home, which is much more fabulous than my Rogers. But now that we're recording in the church, here's the organ. And I don't know if you can hear it, but there's a lot of, we have a little bit of wind leaking. So there's that high hiss. You probably hear that from a lot of choir videos, or if there's an air conditioning on, something like that. So if you look over here, there's audio effects. So this is where you're going to have all sorts of options to tidy things up. So the way to fix up the hiss is to go to the channel EQ. And this is one of those scary looking things, right?
Colin,
My goal, yeah.
tell me what EQ stands for. I don't know. I'm not just.
I think it's equalizer. So what I want you all to know is I'm not an expert in this either. I don't know all the terms. I've had to Google it. And there are a lot of things on here that are scary looking. I'm just going to highlight the things that are really that you need to pay attention to, because there are all sorts of, there's a lot of stuff you just don't need.
I'll also say that you know, for however it's labeled or however it's organized in Logic, there is going to be some similar or analogous function in whatever program you're using. It's going to have some way for you to adjust the volume of individual tracks. It's going to have some sort of EQ. It's going to have some sort of analogous function. So don't be afraid to fuss around with it until you find it.
Right, and EQ is a standard audio thing, so I'm sure most software would call it that, but you might find it in a different space. So I'm going to play. You might not be able to hear it so well on this example, but if I sort of drag these things down, it gets rid of the high-pitched frequency, the really high hissy thing. So you'll just go in and kind of play around with it until it sounds good to you, and just trust your ear. You don't need to worry that you're not an audio engineer. And then I'm not sure that our recording equipment picks up the bass so well. So sometimes I, move up the little bubbles for the lower end until I'm really happy with it. You get the idea. Unfortunately, we don't have time, and you would be really bored to watch me futz with that as much as I sometimes do. So that's the EQ, which is good for getting rid of the hiss and maybe boosting some of the fundamental sounds. Now, another thing that is helpful, actually, I won't do that quite yet. I should say that there's a question, a sort of ethical question that comes up of how much editing is too much. And for me, I try to make it sound like what I think our choir would sound like if we were rehearsing. And I try not to go in and futz with every little detail, because in real life, mistakes happen. Now, for our videos, we have about 50 people for every hymn. So when you have 50 different voices, just like in real life, mistakes get covered up. But if you have a smaller group, sometimes it sticks out a lot, and you're left with no choice. And we should also say that our ears, I think, are a little bit more critical when we're listening to a recording than to a live performance. So let me show you how to fix a pitch if you really absolutely have to. So remember, there's this little escalator button up here. So next to it is a nice fancy bow tie button. So I'm going to mash that, and I'm going to zoom way in. So I'm going to stretch it out high and wide. And so now this is where I can do the sort of fine tuning details, and see it says flex pitch. So it's going to think about it for a second. Okay, so now I'm going to zoom in even more. And here's our singer. So let's see. The first note, let me zoom in a little bit more. The first note I don't know if you can hear that. Sometimes it plays. So it says it's an A3. So good. The first note is an A. That's what we want. But it says it's 27 cents flat, minus 27. So you can actually just kind of drag that note up and down. And you can get rid of vibrato, etc. I tend to not do that. I feel like I don't want an over-engineered recording. But so if there's a note that's really wrong, let me show you this way. Can you hear that? I think we lost our audio on here. Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's not going to play it over Zoom. But so this is just dragging notes up and down. So fun little tool if you're really desperate. So I'm going to go back to my little escalator view. And Jessica asked me about, what do you do if there's a really wrong note, or, somebody drops something, or, the sister barges in the room. So remember, this is the volume. I can put two little nodes here. Let's say this phrase here, I don't want to hear anymore. I just drop it way down, and then you won't hear it anymore. So can you hear that now? Is the audio work? Okay. So if I go back here, watch. So you see it kind of cuts that out. So I want to fast forward just for the sake of time, unless Jessica or Jason, there's anything really crucial. I'm going to do a couple more things in Logic, but anything so far?
Hang on, I'm looking. No, I don't see any questions about this yet.
Okay. Okay, now I'm going to share sort of here's the finished Lobster Thermidor version almost. So sometimes I will, if I want to balance out, so I've balanced out all my sopranos, they sound like a really good ensemble, then I do that with every voice part. But let's say I have 47 altos and 2 sopranos and 3 tenors, just like in real life. So, and this is a standard audio mixing board thing. In Logic Pro, I found there's this button up here, it just looks like little sliders, and it brings up this thing, which looks like the sort of scary mixer board that you'd see in real life. And for each, I need to get rid of my Zoom screen. Okay. For each singer, so these are our tracks. For each singer, there's a little slider. So this is their volume. I slide that up and down. And then for output, I can send them to a bus. Wouldn't you love to put the altos on a bus all by themselves? Wouldn't that be fun? So you make a soprano bus, an alto bus, tenor bus, keep them away from the altos, etc. So then, so these are my buses over here. So I can now so I can adjust all the sopranos or all the altos, all the tenors. And then I send these to another bus. So it's the tutti singers. And then that's where I'll do things like, where you can also go to stereo out, but that's where I'll do things like add the effects. So again, remember I said audio effects is where you find the channel EQ, things like that. So Space Designer, this is fun. So this is where I get to pretend like Trinity Church doesn't have pew cushions anymore. And so I'll add some acoustic here. Etc. Now you need to be careful. You need to use your ear and make sure that it doesn't sound ridiculous. For those of you who use Logic Pro, I've found that this medium spaces, Prince Hall 1 works, and then just play with the wet and dry are really the things you need to worry about. All these other things, don't get too involved there.
I liken that to an Instagram filter. That
yeah.
Softens some of the edges a little bit.
Yeah, it does help cover up a whole lot of things too. Then Sometimes, well, I think I already adjusted the volumes on this to make it a little bit more usable. But in the end, you'll see this number here. See this number here? You want it to stay kind of certainly below 0. These are the decibels. And when I first started this, I thought, well, I want more decibels. I want more sound. And I don't want negative decibels. That doesn't sound right. But you want it to stay kind of below probably even -5 if you can. It changes. So you want to find the loudest spot and see where it registers and keep it in the green. We don't want to go in the red. Now, what do you do if it does go in the red? Go to the compressor is another thing that you'll want to use a lot. And so the compressor is basically a fancy way of adjusting the volume and sort of compressing the sound wave into something more manageable, so you don't get that audio clipping sort of sound when you overblow the mic. And so the input gain is kind of a volume thing. Can I talk and play this at the same time? Does that work? I don't think it does.
Try it and see what happens.
Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to turn this down. So see. So that's the input, and then the output is what you want to come out, obviously. So, and then there's a thing here about the ratio. So for 2 to 1, so the ratio between the input and the output. So you generally will want to reduce the input and maybe increase the output a little bit. You need to futz around with it. Again, there are all these other things that don't worry about it. It all looks scary. You don't need to worry about it. And last thing that might be useful for you in Logic Pro is the expander. If somebody's mic, if their video sound is making very little sound, you might use the expander to up the gain, which is a fancy word for the volume. So then once I've gotten things really the way I want, I'm going to go up here, and for those of you who are fairly tech savvy, you would think, oh, I should export it or save it or whatever. What you want to do is bounce it. That's sort of fun audio lingo. The project, I want to bounce the project, and there's always this question. This is something I learned in COVID tide. What kind of file do I want? You generally want a WAV file. Don't do MP3 or anything like that.
And that's common. WAV is common to both Mac and PC, correct?
Yes, it's a standard audio file. So I'm going to bounce it. Great. So once I've done that, imagine I did it. Great. Now I'm going to switch to Logic Pro. Sorry, Final Cut Pro. Stop my screen share.
While Colin is doing that, I want to offer a little bit of encouragement. If that's intimidating to you, Colin is describing this as his lobster thermidor. If lobster thermidor is not your thing, make a grilled cheese sandwich. Just very simply. That's what I did back in April or May or whenever it was that we started making virtual choir recordings. Just started off very, very simply. And even now I go back and listen to some of those and think, oh, I had no idea what I was doing. And I hope that in another 6 months, I'll look back and go, oh, I still had no idea what I was doing. So don't be discouraged. And this is a time when you can experiment and just try new things.
Right. I learned almost all of this just by futzing around with it and pressing buttons and turning dials to find out what happened. And many of us are organists, and we like to press buttons on organs and in real life and turn dials.
We also like to press buttons.
So just, fool around with it, give yourself some time to experiment. Also, Google and YouTube are your friends. You can find anything you need to figure out on there. So now here we are in Final Cut Pro. So we did the audio. Now I'm going to do the video separately. So just a quick orientation. So I imported everybody's videos. Here are all my choir members. Aren't they pretty? Great. And then here's what this middle screen is, kind of what your video actually looks like. Down here is your timeline. and it works just kind of like music. So, you know, you have your horizontal and your vertical. I have everybody stacked up. I just kind of drag them down like this. I don't know about other software, but most of the Apple stuff is just very drag and drop, which makes it very easy. Of course, I don't know if you can see this, but now I have the spinning wheel of death. Over here, over here you have an inspector. So this is where you can adjust things on each individual video. And then over here on the right, this little purple button here is where all the effects are. And then another fun bow tie is where all the transitions are. So I imported all my videos, and now you'll see again, I have all these little spikes. And again, those are the claps. So the clap on the main timeline, here's Richard at the organ clapping. Let's listen to him. 2, 3, 4. There we have it. And so here's the audio file down here that I bounced. I imported that. I'm gonna line that up with the clap from Richard. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with all my choir members. So if you just slide it, you can trim it and then move it over, and then et cetera, et cetera. Now, again, remember to zoom in and make sure that everything is lined up, even when you're really on a small scale. So here you can zoom in vertically, and here's horizontal. So I zoom in all the way, and if you look here, you can see how unaligned things actually are. So I need to move my audio file way back, etc.
Hey, Colin,
Yep.
sorry, Michael Monacandum has brought up a good thing. He asked about how you extracted the video. So when you do drop the files into Logic Pro, it gives you the option to just extract the audio.
Right. Yeah. So a dialog box will come up, and it says, "Do you want it?" There are two boxes to check, and just uncheck the one about including the video. Right. So now I've gotten everything lined up the way I want. Now this is where we fast forward. Here, so imagine I did that. I won't bore you with it. So here I have everything lined up. And you'll notice that you only see the person who's on the very top in the screen. Now I can disable the clip, which is just on Logic Pro, the shortcut is V on your keyboard. And so now it makes poor little Henry gray, and it shows these two girls. I can keep doing that, etc. But I want to see everybody on the screen because it's choir. So there are many plugins for Final Cut Pro, and I found this amazing $20 plugin. I think we have it in the resources list from Jessica. It's called Screen Splitter 2 from fcpeffects.com. And I think it costs $20, and it has saved countless hours. So it gives you all these options. You see it here of different shapes that I can make. Oh, I have a spinning wheel of death again. You should.
While Colin is combating the spinning wheel of death, I just want to remind everybody that for every piece of software that we mention that, you know, may cost more money than you're budgeted for, there is a free or cheap or trial version that you can use, at least until you know whether or not you're able to make that or willing to make that investment in that technology.
And while we're there, a quick note on hardware. So I spent months doing these on my sad old little laptop, and it worked. You're going to have problems with storage, so you can buy an external hard drive. And for months, I walked around with mine dangling off my laptop, and my husband called it my computer's colostomy bag. But then just as luck would have it, long story short, I have somehow inherited the defective fancy Mac computer that was attached to the Hauptwerk practice organ at St. Thomas Fifth Avenue. So somebody's lending it to me, so I'm lucky. But to say that you can do this on pretty much any computer that's within the last few years. So back to putting singers in boxes. So I have 16 singers here, so I need to divide my screen up into 16. And this gives you all sorts of options of how to divide up your screen. So here's a little box. I'm just going to drag it. And suddenly Henry is smaller. And I can keep dragging these. But another way to do it, we need to get rid of the sound anyway, because we have our separate recording. So here's our yellow line. Again, that's his volume. We just drag it down. So now I want all the other choir members to look like Henry, model chorister. So edit, copy. And then I'm going to select all of my other singers and edit, paste effects. So now that will mute them all, and they're all in that little same size square. But and actually, let me hide Richard. Sorry, Richard. There he goes. He's away. So now over here in our inspector, it gives you the ways to adjust this fancy square. So the position, I'm going to put Henry in position 1. These girls are in position 2. Now here's Darren. I'm going to move him over to 3 and 4, etc. So, and you just put them in their various spots. Now you can do all sorts of other things. You can add borders. You can, this is helpful. You can adjust the scale. Woo! Woo! Inside the box. So if somebody's, really far away, etc., you can move them. So there's this XY thing. So if I move him on the XY axis over, you can do that. So once I've done all that, now here's the next little step. So I have everyone in their boxes. Don't you wish you could put choir members in boxes in real life? So, I could, again, if we want just the easy grilled cheese version, this is fine. See if it'll play. And my computer's running a little slow, so it might look funny. But let's say for the second stanza, I want to do something different. So I can blade it. And I think this is a standard video editing thing. It's just like blading the old school film reel. So I can see from my sound wave here that that's stanza 2. And here's the breath between stanza 2 and stanza 3. So I'm going to blade that again, a blade all. So I just did right? So now I'm going to make all these people inactive. Ooh, I forgot to blade here. Now I'm going to hide all this. I'm going to do something fun. I like to showcase different choir members during the sort of inner stanzas, just for something different. So I'm going to make a little section. I can see where each phrase is. You can see the breaths in the sound wave down here. Trim, blade, all. And now I'm just going to feature some people. So notice the screen is black because I have all these inactive. So I'm going to make Henry active for the first one, except I'm going to get rid of this effect over here. So now he's full screen. And then let's have Eleanor and Lila here. And then we'll go to Darren here. Ta-da. So now, so you get the idea. So you're not stuck with the same screen the whole time. Now, for the final stanza, I get this question a lot. I have my box now of all my singers. Now, what can I do with it? So this is the final stanza. Oh, I should also say that for the middle stanza, I just removed the organ in Logic Pro. So it was suddenly an unaccompanied stanza, something fun to do. So now I'm going to select all these 16 people.
Sorry, Colin.
Yeah.
Someone has asked what you use to record the organ with.
Oh, good question. I think we put that in the resources. We initially were just using our iPhones. That was kind of inadequate for our situation at Trinity. For those of you who've been there, you know that we have a huge organ in the back and another one up front. We play them both at the same time. So when we were using our iPhone at the console, all you could hear was the console noise. So we got a Zoom handy H4n Pro recorder. I think it was, they have various models, but they're $200 to $300. And you can also put line in mics. So we have two microphones on the back organ that connect into this little portable recording device on the front organ, and it just mashes all the sound together. We just bought that equipment, and I think we went with really high-end mics, and I think total we spent $800 on our recording equipment. And I think we included a contact person to
We did. There is some poor sweet soul at Sweetwater that's about to get a whole lot of business.
He's great. So so now I've highlighted all these people, and this is probably a Final Cut Pro specific thing, but I want to turn these into one compound clip so they function as one thing. So I believe it's under edit. There's a compound clip thing where I'm going to do Option G, which is the shortcut, and I'm just going to say combined. You just need to name it. So now this is going to operate as one functional unit. And what I like to do sometimes, I'll put, if you look over here, see these teeny little diamonds? I don't know if you can see that. So there's one next to scale, and that's the zoom. So I'm going to click a keyframe. That's that diamond. And it says at this point on this frame, I want it to be, let's say, I'm going to zoom in. I want it to be 225% zoomed. But then by this point, I'm going to put another keyframe. On this frame, I want it to be 100%. So this might be glitchy. I think I have it in the next version. So now I have already done that. Again, lobster thermidor out of the oven. So you get the idea. You can also, if you have more than 16 singers, you can turn that thing into a compound clip. Let me go back. I'm trying to go quickly here. Let me get rid of my keyframes. Again, with the screen splitter thing, you can make it into just 1/4 of the screen. So, and then you can move that around. So I could have, you know, multiples of 4 on the screen, if that makes sense. And then just, I know we're running short on time, just a final step that I often do, because we have this beautiful building that we're not able to be in, we like to use some B-roll footage of our church. So I put it, you know, sort of over the intro. Again, this is just, we don't have fancy videographers, it's just photographs. And I use, there's the Ken Burns effect, or I use the keyframes to zoom in and out through the clip. The other fun thing that I like to do is, this is, if you look over here, there's rotation. So you can actually rotate a picture, which feels very like Westminster Abbey, Prince William wedding sort of grandeur. And then transitions, you can add crossfades, which are these gray things. So it just kind of softens the transition. You see a little shot of Richard playing the intro. I have him zooming out with keyframes, etc. And I think that's kind of the end.
Colin, this is so interesting, and I want to say 2 things. One is that if this is daunting for you, you do have the option of making an audio only virtual choir, and you can have title cards with just like the hymn text. You know, this is kind of varsity, and there are junior varsity ways to do this. If this terrifies you, I think it's fascinating, and I love playing around with stuff like this just to see how it works and see what I can do. And also, there was a question that was posed to the panelists in the chat by Walden Moore. he said it might be helpful for folks to know how much time per week must be committed by a staff person to produce each item. It's a lot. I can tell you, it's a whole lot, and I haven't been doing anything nearly as fancy as what Colin has been doing. And at one point, we were doing 5, 6, 7 pieces of music per week, and that's all I was doing. And we've streamlined our service just a little bit to require a little bit less music, so it doesn't require quite so much time. But I would encourage you, if you're doing this kind of thing, because this is so new, to quantify how much time you're spending and include that information in your like annual parish report if you do something like that for your annual parish meeting, just so folks know, just so folks are aware that to do this takes just a tremendous amount of time and effort and resources and knowledge, most of which we're learning as we go.
Yeah, I just want to be completely upfront and say that this has become practically my full-time job now. I feel like I'm no longer a musician. I'm a movie maker, and I regret that. I really, it was fun in the beginning. Let me see if I can make this work. And now it's kind of like the old Dunkin' Donuts commercial, time to make the donuts.
Yeah.
But I think if we're really serious about our ministry and keeping our choir members engaged and leading worship, if we really are passionate about this music, in our case, we're not able to be in the building and be together 6 feet apart, whatever. So this to me seems like our only option at the moment. And so for me, that makes it worth it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And even once we, I think, are safely back in precedented times as opposed to unprecedented times, there may be a demand for some of this, and you may wish to continue experimenting with it. I think it's interesting to see how the performance practices around this develop and how we get better and better and better. Um, but that still doesn't mean that it's not just a whole lot of work, and we need to make sure that folks understand that we just, this doesn't just happen. It takes a lot of effort, and I think there's an art to it as well. So thank you so much, Colin. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want each one of y'all, if you would, to share your COVID silver lining, if you would. And I'll share mine first. Mine is that since we have been doing some virtual choir recordings, I've got folks from all over the parish who cannot normally commit to a weekly rehearsal that are submitting recordings and have discovered some really fantastic voices. And that's been really, really wonderful. And I'm going to ask Woosung to go next.
Well, I think the silver lining that we have through all those trials and challenges, I think we came closer together as a community. There's especially from the choir, for me, I think there's a lot of forgiveness of, because we have to adapt and we have to change things. Nothing is really usual, but I think I think we're learning more about each other and kind of what the challenges are. We check in with each other more often. Not so busy with the intense rehearsals, but just have that moment to keep in touch and especially like kind of checking in with the people who might be in more need during this time. And I really have to say our choir members, there are several members who really stepped up during this time, and I'm really thankful for that. And just taking away how much, just a reminder of how much we miss singing together, but not just dwelling on that. But using it in a positive way, we just value that memory, and we come together and spending time together to just be reminded and keep that passion alive, and just having the support of the choir and the whole music community. That's really great encouragement moving forward for everyone.
I do think that we can use times like this to really kind of evaluate what's important, and that gives me a lot of hope. Arreon, what about you?
I completely agree with the community aspect. Definitely, there's been a big growth in community. We've also seen some increased engagement as well. Similarly, as what we've heard before, some folks who might not have had the time are now have the time, which is great. And personally, I find that the silver lining has to go in my own pedagogy and practice. And I feel that so much of what we do as conductors and organists is definitely responsive to what our singers are doing. But really, I think to do this well, you're actively anticipating kind of where the errors may be. You're actively anticipating rather than reacting. So I found myself thinking a little bit further ahead and kind of scanning and kind of analyzing where pitfalls might fall a little bit differently. And I would think that every single person in my choir has probably would tell you that now I have become even more sensitive to attacks and cutoffs. And so they've gotten really, really, really good. And, you know, because I always joke with them, I'm like, if you could all just do that, that'll save me an hour. And so like, I think that the precision in our singing has certainly has increased.
Yeah. Marissa, what about you?
I would echo that for sure, and just kind of say that again, that I think the opportunity to focus on like individual musicianship, because that's sort of sometimes what we're limited to, especially with kids when we're doing these RSCM times, or even with adults, working one-on-one with adults and saying, you know, have you ever wanted to do Voice for Life but you didn't have time or whatever? We can do it now. And so the fact that they know that they're being recorded and that they're committing to this means that they are aware, but also, you know, having that joke with them of like, please don't say your S's too loud because I will spend all of my Monday trying to quiet you. There is definitely a different opportunity to focus on theory and interval training and things in a way where we couldn't before. And there was something that our rector at Trinity said, at sort of, I think in the beginning, and he said, community is presiding over quality in a way that is unusual for the Episcopal Church. And I kind of love that because we really are using music as a tool for community. And even though we want the quality to be good and we are doing our best to make it so, it really comes back, as Colin said, to making sure that they're engaged. So that heightened sense of engagement. And then I think the other silver lining that I reflected on personally was that since I have been down in Florida and not in Massachusetts, one of the things I've done with my incredibly small choir, because let me tell you, St. Peter's Choir is about 10 people, is that I convinced two of my colleagues down here. I mentioned Betsy Calhoun earlier with the summer choir camp, but also Michael Corzine at First Presbyterian. We have done a virtual 3 choirs hymn every Sunday, or every first Sunday of the month. And so that has been really great because not only do I benefit as a small choir, we get this really massive, wonderful choir sound, but it's also showed people from the different parishes that we can worship across geographic and denominational boundaries in a way that we could only have done in this kind of a time. And I think we've all sort of benefited from it, and we've learned from it. So that's been a highlight for me.
Colin, what about you?
So I knew this question was coming and I worked up a list and it actually was really long. So I'll try to just choose a few. From a technical perspective, you know, sitting and listening to your choir members, you start to get a sense of, oh, I didn't realize that this person always struggled to sing in tune, or, you know, always, you know, holds cutoffs long. You know, you start to get to know the singers in a different way, and you start to get to know the repertoire in a different way. We recorded the Parry, I Was Glad, a few weeks ago, and that's one of those things I thought that our choir members just knew because we do it every year, and they all, you know, made the same mistakes in the same spot. So you start to realize, oh, you know, maybe I didn't realize that in rehearsal, or maybe, you know, you just get a better sense of how you might rehearse the music in the future. And then we've noticed that many of our singers actually with pitch problems are singing much better these days. I think part of it is listening through headphones. They are also probably watching themselves and critiquing themselves and submitting, 12 different takes. So that's been an improvement. And then from a community perspective, we have a lot of former choir members who have moved all over the world, who have kind of rejoined us. We have a family who moved to Madagascar for 2 years, and they submit videos every week. We have somebody in Germany, somebody from Denver. So we've reunited with people. We also had several choir members. They're now choir members. We auditioned them back in the spring and said, maybe you should take some voice lessons and then try the summer choir out and, work up to it. You're not quite ready yet. And we've been able to include them. So that's been great. And then I'd say we've learned a lot about ourselves as a community through this. Early on, we were actually not that early on. A few months ago, we shared, we were sharing our videos, and a parishioner of color emailed us to say, I don't think that the choir, the people I see on the screen are representative of our congregation, and I want to see more people like me. And so, it was something we were already thinking about significantly, but it caused us to move more swiftly. We're now including members of the congregation in our hymns to include the fuller diversity of our parish. And our choir has started a diversity and inclusion committee to sort of examine why, as a choir, we're not representing the parish. And I'm not sure that we would have gotten that little kick in the pants had it not been for this.
That's fantastic. I want to share a couple of parting thoughts with you, with the reminder that Colin will stick around for just a few minutes afterwards if you have any super in the weeds questions. But mainly, I hope that we have done something useful for y'all tonight. I hope that you've gotten at least one or two practical, concrete things that you can do in your own parishes. And I'll also say that if you're interested in joining the Association of Anglican Musicians, I would encourage you to visit our website at anglicanmusicians.org. More importantly, though, I hope that we have renewed your hope, and I hope that we have given you a little bit of joy in the work that we have to do right now. I saw something on Instagram the other day, and I usually do not get my theology from Instagram. I don't recommend that, but this is something that really resonated with me, and it was a post from St. John the Divine in New York, I think, and it was something about hope being a discipline, and that was such a helpful reminder for me. Hope is something that we have to practice, and we also have to model it for the communities that we serve, even when it's tough. But I think that if we can model that, if we can also model adaptivity, if we can model flexibility, that we'll have much healthier communities in the long run. And the last thing I want to share with you is a collect that I wrote for my choir here in Jackson. Let me see if I can share my screen. So, the Lord be with you. O God, who alone hearkens to the songs of our souls, tune our hearts to sing your praise, that we, singing your songs in a strange land, may continue to magnify and praise your name forever and ever, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So if you are interested in sticking around for just a few minutes and maybe seeing Colin's new puppy, a French bulldog named Marla, who is the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life, or perhaps asking him a question about how to assemble a virtual choir, he can stick around for just a few minutes to take those questions. So, Jason, what's popping up?
Mark Nelson asked a good question about someone had mentioned problems with using the a cappella app for children. Could someone maybe explain what that problem might be?
Yeah, you're passing things from person to person. So it is just so you know, at the the choir school, we never pass anything from person to person. It's them directly to us and to no other person. So I definitely discourage the acapella app because there's no way for you to know what is happening on it. So if you can't, if it doesn't go from them to you, then I don't think it is appropriate to really use for children.
Arreon, someone else has asked about, you mentioned about having some guest speakers come into your choir rehearsals online. Um, are those people being paid, or are they friends, or?
Most of them are friends and have been exchanging. There might have been one or two, but I think that's probably it. And we've had someone every week probably since April. So I would say talk to your friends and offer to go into their rehearsals as well. Most of mine have been swaps.
Does anyone have any thoughts about doing the record? Has anyone have any experience perhaps with doing the virtual choir videos and then having those shared live in churches?
Like during a worship service?
Yeah, like so choir assembles it in advance, and then because you're not allowed to sing on Sunday mornings in the building,
Oh,
being projected.
Yeah, we actually have done that a couple of times. So all our virtual choir things were not just shared on social media, but there was very specifically worship focused. So all the virtual choir, we either use it on the communion anthem or different parts, or it was quite interesting to see the face of the clergy sitting there and watching a little screen, and they actually realize what's actually happening, that is actually being streamed, and you can kind of see them try to see what's going on. And the responses, especially being used in worship, were really positive.
I'm not sure if this is exactly what's being asked, but for our Wednesday even songs, we have done virtual choir recordings of the canticles and the responses that our choristers have in their repertoire. And so we share those, we do a screen share of those videos during evensong, but we have a live officiant. We sing the collects live, and then I click play for the amens. We do the psalm live, plain song, rotating through different kids, each one doing a solo. But we do share the virtual choir videos there.
Would anyone like to speak about copyright information, rules, and stuff like that with virtual choirs?
No.
More and more publishers, I'm noticing, are now including mechanical licenses with the purchase of music, which I think is fantastic. And I think that more publishers will follow suit. I know that St. James Press is one that does that. Until that time, though, please use one license or whatever service you have to report things. There is an excellent article that we've included with the materials that we'll send you by David Scott that's posted on the AAM website, that is everything you could ever want to know about copyright law, and it makes me wish that I had gone to law school.
Are any of you, are any of your choirs meeting in person in any way?
This isn't for my choir specifically. We have spaces on the cathedral property where we can sing outside, kind of in an enclosed alcove area. The acoustics are favorable for that. So right now we're doing groups of no larger than 8, singing outside, distance, masked, as safely as we possibly can. I know that some other folks are having luck singing in other outdoor spaces.
Yeah, we actually have rented a giant tent outside in the parking lot, and we actually use that for an outdoor services. And we actually have invited the choirs to kind of, socially distance, wearing masks, but sit around a tent, and we kind of hook up the, electronic organ from the hall and kind of blast that out. It's a really weird experience because when I'm in the hall playing, I can't hear a thing.
Yeah.
But I can hear the introduction of the hymns from the clergy, and that allows the choir members to kind of come and have that moment of, while wearing a mask, just to really just sing. So that outdoor tent space has been really, really valuable. And we tried one outdoor rehearsal with the choristers, all spread out in that tent area. Same thing, masked, distanced, but you kind of have to fight like street noise. So we actually have to give me the microphone and run a rehearsal that way so kids can actually hear what I'm saying. So I kind of felt like doing a glorified karaoke or something like that. But I asked the kids how they actually thought about that, because I thought they'll be frustrated wearing a mask and try to sing and fight the street noise. But all the kids that I actually talked to, they really kind of missed it. So, just plenty of hand sanitizer and plenty of distance and a mask. And that seems to have been quite helpful.
Someone has Stephen White has shared about the website application Kahoot, K-A-H-O-O-T, which is great for being able to create games and quizzes and things like that you can actually do interactively over Zoom. Does anybody else, someone else had asked earlier about what other types of games are you doing over Zoom with your choristers?
Marissa has included several links, I think it was Marissa, to that kind of thing on her, in the resources that she passed along.
And go ahead, Arreon.
No, I mean, we're doing a lot of just kind of like online games that we can do. I'm leading a lot from where I am, where I can bring other folks in. We're doing magic card tricks. We're doing music games, forbidden pattern, all those sorts of kind of things via Zoom. And what I do is, because it was becoming like a lot on me, it's a head chorister responsibility. So now a head chorister, plans that out, what it's going to be, and they kind of let me know what it's going to be beforehand, and they kind of run and manage that.
So we actually did a whole parish wide week-long camp, a whole parish camp over the summer, and I got a lot of ideas from that we've used with our choristers. So things like just charades, old school, but works on Zoom. Pictionary, you can share a whiteboard on the screen and have kids draw. Other things that I've seen, a Dutch auction where you give kids things from around their house that they have to try to find, and you judge it, and they run off. And so there are a lot of other fun things that don't include, having to just sit on a website together.
Yeah.
We also did a talent show, which was a hit.
Just one quick thing. There was a question about are you singing in person in masks and humming? We're not doing any humming or anything like that. And I do know that there's a big debate about humming, and so I've stayed away from that. But one thing that I am doing to make my virtual choirs a lot easier and less intensive is rehearsing socially distanced, a small group of singers in person with a click track. And then the next day, those section leaders send those to me, and I send those out to the rest of the choir. And I'm like, and then all of the sopranos sing with the soprano section leader, and all the altos sing with the alto one. And it's probably saved me 5 or 6 hours a week. So I would recommend doing that. Pro tip, it'll align a lot of things for you and solve a lot of intonation issues.
Oh, that's really smart. Thank you. Jason, are there any other questions in the...
Has anyone reused something from your service?
I feel like
is anyone not?
So we did, and especially, like the Gloria, whatever, the service music, fine. For Pentecost, we had the whole choir wear red, and we did Come Down, O Love Divine. And then over the summer, we asked the parish for their favorite hymns, which we would include in worship. And then we wrote them, Richard wrote them a note to say, hey, we're doing your hymn this weekend, which is a great way to get people to sign on. And one of them was Come Down, O Love Divine. So I thought, okay, great. And I just sort of sent the file off to our communications office, not thinking about it. And suddenly there was the whole choir wearing red again in August.
One idea or a thing I want to share that doesn't necessarily fit anywhere else. If you're having a hard time getting your singers and your choristers to engage with some of the virtual choir stuff, I have 2 women in my choir that have turned out to be fantastic composers. And I had no idea, and they keep sending me things, and I keep saying, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. So we've done some of their pieces in our virtual choir, and that's a really nice way to kind of engage folks and encourage composers. So, maybe you've got a teenager in your choir that's wanting to compose, and now is a great time to, really encourage that.
And you might also have a teenager who's into technology and wants to make virtual choir videos.
Has anyone started? Does anyone have special plans for what to do on Christmas Eve?
We are starting to have that conversation at the Cathedral. And, I shared with the choirs last week, I believe, that, I didn't think that Christmas would look like what they had hoped it would look like, that it would be different from previous years, but that we would make it as beautiful as we possibly could. And I'm giving them time to process that just a little bit. But to answer your question, no, we have not figured out Christmas Eve yet.
At Trinity, our priority is not Christmas Eve, it's candlelight carols. No one cares about Christmas Eve. And so we've been thinking about what to do about candlelight carols. And our rector said, if we cancel candlelight carols, it's going to be the front page of the Boston Globe, and we can't have that. We have to save Christmas. And he's right. And so our thinking right now, our hope and our plan is to assemble virtual choir videos of just, basic Christmas carols. We don't need What Sweeter Music or anything like that, and including other choirs from around the city. And then the hope is to gather in Copley Square, shut down the streets and let people socially distance. And we'll have big jumbotrons that will show the video so people can kind of sing along. And then we'll also have a camera crew to broadcast that live. But we haven't gotten permission yet or a budget, so that might not happen. That's the dream.
It's just money. It's just money. There's a comment in the chat. Robert Richter says that the Diocese of Indianapolis is tentatively planning on a virtual lessons and carols service with multiple parishes submitting different carols. This is a great time for especially cathedral musicians to really do something for their diocese. I think it's incumbent on cathedral musicians anyway to serve both the parish and the diocese. So if you are looking for something to do, I think that's a great idea. Jason, are there any other questions popping up in the Q&A? Yeah. Have we solved everything?
COVID is over.
All of the COVID music making problems. Thank y'all so much to our panelists. This was a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I think that we have done something helpful for the church, and I know that folks will appreciate it. And we will get this recording out to folks and this list of resources, and hopefully can do more stuff like this in the future. So okay, well, thank y'all so much. It's been good to be with y'all.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you, Jessica.
See y'all later.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.